one. Hello, my lovely gurus. I hope you're having a great morning, evening, afternoon, or night whenever you're listening to the Level Design Lobby. And I'm thankful for all of you listening to me. But not just me this time. We have a lovely man with a great voice who's coming to educate us and drop his wisdom, Mr. Steve Thornton. How you doing, sir?
Oh God, that was a really good intro. You're really good at this.
I try to build the confidence of everyone. You know what I mean? Like I find especially in game dev, we're all very kind of shy sometimes about our own work and that, and obviously imposter syndrome runs rampant in our industry. So build us all up, mate, is my kind of motto.
Yeah, if you ask around, people probably won't tell you that shyness or confidence is a problem of mine. So,
well, then we just got the wind beneath your sails, then, my friend, and ready to all go. So, for those of you who may not be aware of Steve, do you mind giving an introduction to yourself, my friend?
Nope, no problem. So, yes, I'm Steve Thornton, and I've now been in the industry for about 10 years. I've got 2 game design degrees, and in fact, why don't I just do it from the top? I'll do the full life story. So, I got into the game industry via university. I went to the University of Central Lancashire, or UCLan, which is in the city of Preston in England, and I took the game design course there. They also did a game programming course, but I was interested more in the creative part. So the game design course at UCLan is more kind of art and creativity focused. Teaches things like basic editor work, Maya, Photoshop, documentation, that kind of thing. So I went to university for that. I went there for the bachelor's, and then at the end of the bachelor course, I asked myself the question if I thought my portfolio was ready to apply to new companies, and I didn't feel it was. So I put my effort into getting a first class degree there instead, which allowed me to get a scholarship for their master's program, and I went back to UCLan again for their master's program. And it was while I was there that I was able to get via UCLan and the tutors connections there, a work experience placement or 3 at Traveller's Tales, which is the studio that makes the Lego games over in Wilmslow and Knutsford, also in England. So I started off university, did those 2 courses, and while I was there, it's a good example of how a career can be based on both kind of skill, effort, and luck, because although I had some placements with TT before, with TT Games, Traveller's Tales. TT, as they're affectionately known. I think they've rebranded now to just be TT Games, a bit snappier. So those ones, my first couple, I just got summer placements, but the one that became a job, I came into the university room just a little bit earlier than usual, and I'd overheard the tutors talking to someone else about a game placement at TT again, and I basically went, "Can I come?" And they added me. There was 3 of us that went in the end. They added me to the effort. And halfway through that placement, which was, I forget now, my mind plays tricks, but I think it was like a month placement. And halfway through, they said they actually wanted to hire one of us as a level designer, or they call it a game designer. More on that later. But they wanted to hire one of us. And after they looked at our work, it was me, or the 3 that they hired, which I kind of think about, actually, because obviously I wasn't meant to be there. And by muscling my way in, I took that job. Although the guys in question who went with me, they went on to do some pretty cool stuff themselves. One of them, I don't think he minds me revealing this, is Pete Bottomley, who founded White Paper Games. So we were on that placement together. He did the driving. He drove me up there. And along the way, massively affected my taste in music and coffee types. Anyway, so I got the first job there at a TT during my master's course. So I was still finishing the master's during those first months there, and talking a bit about how TT works. I was hired as a game designer, but at TT, obviously, they make the Lego titles, and the Lego games are predominantly level based. There's obviously a lot of features involved, but the main kind of meat and potatoes of the games is the levels, 15 of them usually. So the major task that they gave to the game designers there, especially the junior ones, was basically to own one level. And it was a brilliant experience because at the time they were doing, they're quite small teams really, but quite fast development, and you got to own your own little piece of the game. And even though when you first started you couldn't really influence the systems and mechanics very much, you could essentially go from paper all the way to the shelf with your own level. So to walk a little bit through that process, you would get, obviously the Lego games are based on properties like IPs, like, so in my time there, I worked on about 15 of them in about 5 or 6 years. Yeah, so to list them out, if I can do them in order, on my placements, I worked. Actually, the very first placement wasn't on a Lego game. It's the one non-Lego game I worked at TT, which was Guinness World Records on the handheld 3D. I don't know, the DS, the original DS, and the Wii. And basically, what I did there for my very first placement during my third year of uni, a summer placement, unpaid, I think as well. I as I want to be again. University. So yeah, the Guinness World Records task, it was meant to be design based. It was a design placement, but when we got there, the game was at a stage where Guinness World Records is basically built of a huge collection, 50 I believe, mini games based around various world record breaking tasks. And yeah, our task was essentially to play each of those mini games and get a score, and then basically set the high score table of the gold, silver, and bronze trophies to sort of test that those numbers were correct. So it was pretty monotonous as a first job. It was pretty much a form of QA, I would say, embedded QA. After that, then my first Lego project was Lego Rock Band, and that was cool because at the time I was still big into those plastic instrument games. I mean, to say it that way implies I'm not into it now. I would totally play some Rock Band right now. If anyone was porting around that 10 ton of peripherals that comes with.
Yeah, they were great fun. I loved playing them. Made me feel like I actually could play an instrument, but no.
But first, let's have a quick word from today's sponsor. Today's sponsor is none other than me. What I've done, everyone, and I hope you're excited for this, is I've actually created a level design kind of store. What I've done in this store is put up different kinds of tips and tricks that you can find there, whether that be my actual ebook itself, to that of level design pamphlets focused on different things such as traversal, stealth, breaking into the industry, as well as different talks that I have done which you cannot find anywhere else other than on this store. So if you are looking to improve on your level design skills and processes, then check out the Level Design Store, which will be down in the description below, where there'll be a link to find this. All you need to do is head over to gumroad.com/level design lobby. I hope you like what you see, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts. Thank you, and now back to the show.
So on Lego Rock Band, what I did was, it was editor work. They basically had not just the work experience people. I think I could be wrong here, but I think Pete was here for this as well. We were basically placing cameras. So the way that the Rock Band games work, as everybody knows, is that while you do all the gem work in the background, the camera's flying around the band. And there's a bunch of different arena sizes and band setups for those arenas. And essentially what we did was we went in and we checked the cameras weren't clipping or going through any of the environment, and the characters weren't floating or anything, and just tweaked it. We basically just moved all the, if it was broken, we would do a new camera angle. So we basically directed our own little music videos. And I often joke that we worked on the part of the game that no one's looking at, right? Because everyone's looking at the demo tracks. So yeah, after that, so it was Rock Band. I'm just going to go on to listing the projects now, and I'll talk a bit more about my path through them afterwards. So in total, I worked on Guinness World Records, Rock Band. The game I got hired on for my first job was Lego Star Wars 3 The Clone Wars, bit of a mouthful. Then it was Lego Pirates of the Caribbean, pretty proud of my pronunciation on that one. Lego Harry Potter Years 5 to 7, the second one. Lego, I think it was Lord of the Rings after that. Then it was Batman 2. Then it was Lego Chima, Laval's Journey, one of the pure Lego set properties based on one of their toy lines. And after that, Lego Movie, the video game, and then Lego Ninjago Shadow of Ronan, more about that later. And then Lego Marvel's Avengers, and then Lego Star Wars Force Awakens, back to Star Wars again. And finally, I worked very briefly on Lego Ninjago, the movie, the video game, another mouthful. So those are all the games that I kind of touched while I was there. So I started off, as I said, on Lego Star Wars 3 The Clone Wars. And basically, I was given levels to own. So I was able to do, I did the paper design for a level. I was given a location. Clone Wars is based on the TV show of the same name, the CG TV show, which at the time, the first couple of seasons are quite kiddie and quite simple. But that show got really good very fast.
Yeah, it's got a massive cult following, and I know is very well praised.
Yeah. So when we were working on it was only during season 1, and basically the levels are based on season 1 episodes. So I think the very first one that I worked on, I know very well, it was Blue Shadow Virus was the episode that I had to work on. And basically I was given the episode, and that was that. I could design the level from scratch. It had to have 3 acts. They knew the middle one was going to be a flying section that was going to be designed by someone else, because they'd taken all the flying sections and given that to one designer. And basically, I was given this episode, and I could design all of the areas and flow for the level from scratch. And that was really exciting to me, obviously, being brand new, being able to own. So I designed all the layouts and the flow that they kind of did at TT Fusion at the time, which is like the Wilmslow studio of TT Games. They basically give you a level. You do it on paper first. You get it approved by your lead. Paper just being, what we would call cocktail napkin sketches. And then from there, you would do a SketchUp model. So we would do a SketchUp of the environment. Once we had that model together, we would use it to create an annotated level design document that would walk through the flow of the level, and it would be reviewed by the lead designer again. And after that, we would take the SketchUp that had been approved, and we would give it to the level artists. And the first thing they would do is they would take the SketchUp, and depending on how good the SketchUp was, and that would depend on the designer, they would either import the SketchUp in and modify it, or they would make their own version of it from scratch. But essentially, the SketchUp would form the collision mesh of the level. So it would create like the framework in which the design would work, and you would do all of your play testing in that that white box classic. But the kind of beauty of it was that because we were able to get that collision mesh and block map in through the artists, we could basically work on tweaking the distance, etc., while they kind of skinned it. And we always knew that they wouldn't move around any of the gameplay relevant like metrics, because that skeleton was in place. So while they did that, once they had that done, we would then, as a level designer or level owner, we would make an asset list, break down everything we wanted to happen in the level into the props, the animations, the VFX, the sound effects, if you remember those, into a list. And essentially you would get that list of props and requests over to the other departments. You'd manage the creation while the level art's being brought in. And once all of the assets came in, or once they drip fed into your level, you would then go into the editor, which had the obviously the collision layer and art layer. And we would ourselves in the editor set up how the level was going to work. We would attach all the assets together. And TT Fusion had its own proprietary level engine that was extremely friendly to use. Like having left TT, like I've encountered nothing as friendly as the TT Fusion level editor. It was created specifically to make Lego games, specifically for handheld Lego games, in fact. And it was so simple. It had scripting of a kind. It was command-based scripting, but it was the commands themselves are very simplistic. It was like, enable object, F4, all that sort of stuff I found then. And it was very simplistic scripting. I'm not a technical person at all. I've managed to, thus far, dodge any heavy technical work. But if I get a TT, this kind of hands-on level setup, in retrospect anyway, it was very simplistic. It was essentially just naming objects and then putting those names into the attributes of the objects they interacted with, really basic object linking stuff. And this is in the days before visual scripting, if I recall. So essentially the beauty of the TT approach was that because you were doing the paper at the beginning and you were doing the setup at the end, you're connecting the objects yourself. You were literally doing the bean to cup. You were owning the project all the way from the start to the end, because the engine was friendly enough that you were doing all the final setup. The stuff that the player was going to see was done by you, so you can make sure it reflected your final plan. Whereas a lot of studios, including ones that I went to, or teams rather, or editors that I went to work with later, the work of implementing it was so complicated that you don't get to do it yourself. So complicated or so vast, and as a result, or perhaps the team just gets bigger and they bring in a new department that you can delegate that work to. And because you don't have that hands-on touch at the end, you don't really get to tweak the exact thing that goes out the door.
Yeah, no, I can relate to this because, like I said, it's beneficial in some ways because you've got teams which specialize in it, but it also is a shame in other ways because, you'd like to get a handle of it before as it all comes together, but yeah. Yeah,
so actually that's what happened at TT eventually is as they expanded and as we kind of got closer to the console games and their tools, a new department emerged that was based on integration. Their name actually escapes me now. They were technical designers, but I'm pretty sure they were given a different name at TT. Oh, I've got it. Construction artists, they were called. And this started around the time of Lego Movie, I would say. And everything from then onwards, you would still, as a level designer, you would do the paper design, and you would, do all the asset breakdown, etc. But the actual final integration was done by this team who didn't just set up the work, they were also building some of the assets also. So the Lego games, a fun fact people always love about the Lego video games is that every object in the Lego video game world has to be physically feasible to build with real Lego pieces. So we had an entire department of Lego experts. I say entire department, 3 people, 3 key experts who would pre-build new objects to make sure they were possible. And the construction artists had a digital library of Lego pieces that they could build their assets from. And they were able to do things like simple animation. And then when it came to the setup phase, which used to be in the hands of level designers, these experts would now do it instead. And I mean, the result was that these, because they're specialists, I would say the quality bar was definitely higher with the specialized department working on it. So I think it was probably good that the designers were able to kind of let go to an extent there. But yeah, so rewind back to I'm still working on Clone Wars in my life story. Yeah, so I worked in Clone Wars first, and very quickly I formed good relationships with many of the leads there that kind of became like my mentors throughout my time at TT. And I basically got taken on to a project with them. At the end of Clone Wars, I went with my mentor guys, who now work at Squadron 42, the Star Citizen team. A lot of people might not know this, actually, but the Wilmslow-based studio for the Star Citizen, I don't know if they've got their own name. Cloud Imperium is obviously the name of the whole thing. And the group that's making Squadron 42 in Wilmslow is actually largely based on people who used to work at the TT Wilmslow studio.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah. It's not like a big scandalous secret or anything. It's well known.
So cool.
So TT Fusion, the Wilmslow studio of TT, was ran by Aaron Roberts, who is the brother of Chris Roberts, the founder of Cloud Imperium and Star Citizen, of I'm going to get this name wrong, but it's okay. Star Lancer fame, an old space sim game. And essentially, whenever Cloud Imperium was starting up, Aaron left to work there and set up a new studio in England, in Wilmslow, to work on Star Citizen. And many of his old friends there at TT and some of the key people moved across to start that studio. So a lot of the people working on the Squadron 42 single player component of Star Citizen are actually ex-TT, ex-Lego people. And some of them, well, I'm going to say all of them, extremely talented, lovely people. So anyway, back to TT. So yeah, I got on good with some of those talented people that I mentioned, and they took me onto a project they were going on to, Pirates of the Caribbean, which was based on all of the movies so far. I was being made at the same time as the 4th movie was being made, which I think is called Stranger Tides. Could be wrong.
Yeah, I'm not sure on that one, mate, either.
Yeah, it's the one where Johnny Depp tried to carry the entire franchise on his shoulders by himself with, guest appearances only by the previous cast. Anyway, so we went to work on that game. It was already quite deep in development, so we came on to do the levels for the final movie. Same situation there, as I was owning levels, in some cases taking on levels that were in a bit of a bad state, helping clean up their flow and such. And after that, I went on with them to Harry Potter, and same thing, owning levels. That was the point, though, on Harry Potter where I started to take on some system work. There was a couple of mini games in there. Key among them was a dueling mini game that another designer started, but then he left the studio, and I kind of took over that mini game. It's based on the wizarding jewels from Harry Potter.
Oh, awesome.
Duels. The Wizarding Jewels. So I took over that mini game, and that was my first kind of system task, and I got a taste of it, and I liked it, and I actually always wanted to get into the systems. At this point, I've been doing level design for a long time, and I was feeling, as a level designer, I wanted to have more influence over the stuff I could put in a level, because obviously levels are the places that mechanics go to show off and be used and live, and working on the levels where those mechanics would be used, but having very little influence over the mechanics themselves, I started to get hungry to be more involved at the game at a higher level. So on Batman 2, I got my shot at that, and I owned the combat system for Batman 2 on the handheld. And mean, I really liked a lot of stuff I did with Batman 1, so it was just a case of bringing some of that in. It was interesting, though. I don't want to get fully into the LEGO combat system story. I'm a big fan of combat systems as a player and a designer. And at the time, I was still quite young, and I went through a lot of epiphanies and experimentation with the combat system of the LEGO games, trying to turn them into not a deep combat system, obviously, but something that had like a suggestion or a glimmer of depth. And it was around Lord of the Rings that I realized that was a mistake. LEGO combat should feel good. I should put the emphasis on the feel of the combat, because our audience was only getting confused by any problem that couldn't be solved by pressing one button. Basically, our core audience was struggling with.
So, mate, when you were working on these combat systems, how did you add, I guess, create more of the feel for it?
So it came down to the basics. There was a few key updates to how the combat worked that from Lord of the Rings onwards, I tried to bring into every project that I worked on. So a big thing was how the hits were registered. So when I took over the combat, I was actually shocked to find out how it was working behind the scenes. I knew it didn't feel good, but I didn't know why. And it turned out that when a character attacked, what it was doing was it was projecting a 45-degree cone in front of the character to detect if there's any enemies. And then on a certain frame of the combat animation, the attack animation, it would pick the nearest enemy and then assign damage based on the fact they were in the cone and the closest on that frame. So you could only ever hurt one enemy at a time. And no matter how big your swing or your weapon was, you could only ever reach one enemy at a time. And there's only one frame where the damage came out. So regardless of whenever the weapon actually touched the enemy, it was that frame that was dealing the damage. So although you couldn't really follow it with your eye, you could definitely feel it. And players can kind of feel when their impacts aren't at the right time. So what I did was, for the behind-the-scenes system, I brought in actual hitboxes for the weapons, and I brought in a frame window, like a set of frames, like a frame length where like the action would open up and then eventually close again in a later frame when the weapon could hurt people. So there was an action window like in a fighting game. So the frame windows when the weapon could actually hurt enemies lasted a period of time. And so we were actually doing collision checks at that point. You could swing a lightsaber and go through like 3 troopers and contact all of them. And at the exact when the weapon hitbox actually touched them, that's when it would count the attack. And along with action frames, I also brought in cancelling frames. LEGO games had no cancelling for a long time in the animation system, so the ability to interrupt one move with another early and not be stuck in all the recovery phases, because for a lot of LEGO projects, depends on the setup of the team, because not every team at TT was the same, and there was multiple teams working on multiple LEGO games at the same time. So I think not everybody realizes is that there's not like one LEGO team making each game one at a time. They leapfrog each other. They kind of take turns. So there's always kind of experimentation being done, both in like the tech and the management style of the games. So yeah, essentially the animation team in some of the projects were kind of in charge of how the combos looked and behaved, and they would come up with these very, very cool, very flourishy animations for the combat system, but they had a lot of dead weight in them, and from the player's perspective, like there was a lot of time when the player wasn't doing anything, and because there was no cancel frames, the character would stop responding. So responsiveness was a big thing. So by increasing the kind of the detail of the impact with hitboxes and the responsiveness by adding the cancelling frames, that was really important. Also, a thing that I was shocked to realize when I looked at it, a lot of LEGO games don't have impact VFX. When you actually hit an enemy, nothing comes off of them. There's no impact, whatever. So I brought that into the games I worked on. And this was primarily experimented with on the handheld games, where at the time anyway, the higher-ups, the execs, were more willing to experiment on the handhelds than they were on the console. But on Star Wars Force Awakens, I was able to kind of bring some of these improvements into the console combat system. And you can kind of see their fruition not in Force Awakens, which is an improvement, but on LEGO Ninjago the movie. So I'm not sure who the designer was who took over the combat, but I know a lot of the credit for keeping the combat seeds growing goes largely to Archie Yates, who's _Archie Yates on Twitter, who I worked closely with on the Force Awakens combat, and then was also the programmer in charge of the Ninjago movie combat system, and he really made it his baby. Fast forwarding quickly through the career to get up to Ninjago the movie, essentially on TT, whenever I finished working with Lord of the Rings, and I was working on the combat system for that one. There were some leadership changes on that project towards the end, and my role shifted much more closer to leadership than it had been previously. I got the chance to kind of run aspects of the design team. And so after that, after I kind of got my taste on Batman of doing that kind of leadership role, I was quite young at the time. I'd always assumed, I wasn't ready for it. But essentially, without getting into details, the lead of that project left unexpectedly, and a lot of the responsibilities were divided across myself, the producer, and one of the mentors I mentioned previously. And essentially, I got a lot more input on leadership of the project, how it was run, than I had before. And that was, something I really enjoyed. I realized that I really enjoyed management, something I didn't expect about myself when I was working on the levels and when I was kind of in university or dreaming about working in games. It hadn't occurred to me I would enjoy organization so much, keeping things running smoothly, making schedules. I became one of those game designers with the binders, with the colored binders. The Leslie Note designer.
At Level Design Lobby, we believe everybody has a story to tell. Hobbyist or student, freelancer or veteran, we made it our mission to unite those who share our passion for creating and developing great games. Thanks to our generous Patreon backers, we've been able to do just that. So if you've already pledged your support, thank you. If not, you too can ensure the future of Level Design Lobby, helping us to create even more exciting content, collaborations, interviews, and much more. With awesome perks and rewards, whether you're a seasoned professional or just getting started, you're sure to find something for you. Want to share tips, tricks, and advice with passionate, like-minded developers? Our awesome community Discord has you covered. Fancy practicing your level design, creating strong portfolio content, and having fun? Then try our level design weekends. Or perhaps you want to individually discuss your work, hone your skills, or level up your career? Then consider our one-on-one mentorships. If you share our vision, then go to patreon.com/Level Design Lobby for more information and to pledge your support. Thank you.
There's always one, mate. There's always one. And if you don't know who it is, it's you. But no, I was going to ask then. So, switching it across, and you mentioned, about feeling nervous about taking this responsibility, because I hear that from everyone who I've spoken to who's in a leadership role when they first got it. And I guess, how did you eventually become comfortable? You mentioned that you learned to love it, but how did you settle in that position then?
It's funny because in retrospect, I remember being nervous about it. But when I talked to the people at the time, for example, that mentor I mentioned previously, I knew him by name. It's Nick Elms. And basically me and Nick were talking, and I said to him, I remember when I used to be new and nervous, and he was like, no, you were never like that. You were at my desk in my ear, and I'm like, who the hell is this kid? So he remembers it differently. He remembers me being much more overbearing than I recall. So I guess for me, I'd been in a lot of projects already, and I'd seen it be ran certain ways. So there was places I could take existing systems, and there was places where I'd always had objections, and I basically got to experiment with solutions. And they didn't all work the first time. Something I was kind of getting at with the combat system anecdotes there is that Lego games, or TT rather, moved so quickly that if you were going to experiment with new methods, both in design or in management, they wouldn't come to fruition during one project. You would test them on one project, you would notice the flaws in that one, but you would need to wait to the next one before you iterate, because it would move too quickly for you to kind of complete the arc of growth before. Yeah. So I tried a lot of different stuff, and that was one of the huge benefits of TT. And I really did enjoy working there a lot. And I believe that working with so many different teams, leaders, mentors, IPs, clients, publishers, because TT's leadership was always shifting. And like I said, there was always two different teams experimenting with new methods. So it was really a trial by fire. And I got to working at TT at that pace. It was about a year for a console game, which is very short.
I was going to say, yep. My heart skipped a beat when you said it, because I was like, oh, yeah, okay.
And that was good. The handheld games were usually about 6-7 months, and you would essentially, you can kind of work it out based on my resume, because to have that many games, 15 games in 5 years, either I'm only on them for 5 minutes or they're happening very fast, and it's the second one. I was on most of those games from the start to the end, or as close as. I mean, I can say this all now because I've left TT almost 4 or 5 years now, and as I understand it, like management and leadership and methodology has changed again, and I don't think that's reflective anymore of the way TT does things. So I think it's okay to be honest about the history there. So anyway, so working in leadership, I got to try a lot of different stuff. And basically I was allowed to try things and I could fail. And then it was the next project, so I could try something else. There was no big misses or big failures really, outside of the Lord of the Rings Lego handheld combat system, which I think is, in retrospect, kind of embarrassing. I was trying to emulate the PlayStation 2 Two Towers, Return of the King.
Oh, wow, yeah, I remember those ones, yeah.
I love those games.
Yeah,
but
fantastic.
trying to recreate them without the baseline of stuff like cancelling and hit frames and stuff in the tech itself, because these were technical problems. Like I couldn't just have these ideas. You know, it was obvious we needed these things, but because there was a technical debt to be paid in doing them, I tried to proceed without them, using other techniques, and it was foolish. And some of my QA friends from those days, they still make fun at my expense for the pain they suffered getting through those long combat missions, because I was so proud of my first combat system. So yeah, where are we now? So I got a taste of leadership on Batman, which so I was promoted after Batman to assistant game director, or sub-lead at the time, as I called it, sub-lead game designer. And I did that on Lord of the Rings, but because I was quite young and I was still experimenting, they didn't want me to be a game director straight away, even though I kind of did the job at the end of Batman. They brought someone else in to lead that project. But I'd already led the last couple of months of Batman, so they kind of asked me to show that guy the ropes, help him out with adjusting to the studio, because he was new to the studio, and adjusting to the Lego formula and the way that we do things. So I did that, helped out with that project. I had some system ownership in that one also, as I said, the combat, which I'm not super proud of. And after that, we went on to Lego Chima Laval's Journey, which, for those who don't know, is a Lego toy set about animals in armor that fight each other. And it was a little TV show about it and everything. And again, I thought I was going to be director in that one, and there was talk about it. But ultimately, again, I was paired up with someone else and asked to show them the ropes. So then it was Lego Movie was coming up after that, I believe. And I basically said, like, I would like to run this one. So at that point, I felt that I'd helped other people into the role a few times. And they asked me to do it a third time. And I kind of went, no, thank you. I'm going to give up on game directing for a little while. And I hopped teams to another team downstairs. I had a lot of my close friends from the studio on it. I'm going to drop some names. So there's Luke Cashmore, Chris Wyatt, and Ross Wilding, who's actually on Twitter as Scrooged Wolf. And is actually one of the TT people who went to work in Star Citizen. A lot of these guys were the design minds behind Lego City Undercover, the first open world.
Oh wow! This is a really good, great game. You all did a phenomenal job. I really enjoyed that one.
Yeah, it is a really good game. Although we were talking the other day about how it's not aged very well. Certainly, it's on the wrong side of history at the moment. Even Chase McCain can get a pass.
It's not meant to be for all of us, mate.
Yeah, but so anyway, Lego City Undercover. They came off that game and they were working on the console version of Lego Movie, the video game. And I basically said I don't want to be on this track of assistant game director anymore. And I took a step, kind of adjacent, like sideways and a little bit down into their team. And I got a new title because they had a different team structure down there, which was lead level designer. So I actually had a title in there, despite what the name implies. I wasn't the only one. I was one of many. All level designers were lead level designers on that project. So essentially, again, it was back to the role I had before. It was paper design, but they had those construction artists type roles. And so we weren't implementing anymore. We were just doing the plan. So so that was like a movie, and I transferred there. Did that project. That was very fun to work with, like a new structure and new tools. And although it's not really fair now, but at the time it always felt like downstairs they're doing the big projects. Undercover movie. These are the big mysterious projects. So it was cool to be on. The A team, so to speak.
Yeah.
Not reflective of talent, but just of like prestige. So. So after that project, I got the opportunity to be a game director after all. They lured me back to the other team. They were starting a new project, Lego Ninjago, Shadow of Ronan. It was a handheld they were starting, and they needed a game director for it. And ironically, actually, I left behind the previous team, if you say Team B, to move on to Team A, because I didn't want to be assistant game director again. And ironically, the assistant game director that did take that role on Team B, their game director left through their production, and they actually did become a game director after all.
Sod's law, isn't it?
That was a lovely chap called Chima Eden, who went on to direct a majority of the 2D Fusion console games. Anyway, so I went on to direct a handheld game, Lego Ninjago Shadow of Ronan. So it was my first real directing job, and that was awesome. And I had a lot of freedom because it was a handheld exclusive. And as I mentioned earlier, like the executives were much more open to experimentation on those. Like, to be honest, actually, I skipped over Chima a little bit. I'm also really happy with my work in Chima, even though I was the assistant. The director I worked with on that one, Rob Hewson, his name is, lovely guy, and he kind of saw how hungry I was to own stuff like the mechanics, the combat, the unlocks, and we divided the work up into what we called at the time high level and detail design. So essentially, he kept the supervisory role in every part of the game, but I was able to take a hands-on role in a huge amount of Lego Chima. Like, I also went back into my level design role in that one, and I did the initial paper design for, I think, half of those levels. And I tried a bunch of new stuff. Like, I noticed that our mechanics pacing wasn't very good on the Lego games. Like, you would see a mechanic once, it would be introduced, and then it would disappear to the end of the level. And the cool thing about Lego Chima and Ninjago is they were both handheld exclusives, and they were both not based on a console game or a movie. They were free storylines. So we were able to craft the storyline to introduce characters and mechanics in an order and in a pace that was beneficial to the game. Whereas, of course, if you're working on something like Lord of the Rings, you don't really get to choose what characters are on Weathertop or what characters go to Minas Tirith. You know, you've got those characters kind of in stone. So I took an opportunity to try a bunch of new stuff that I kind of that I felt was going to work really well from working at like Nintendo games, really clean pacing. We would introduce mechanic, and I for me, like, Nintendo is like the gold, platinum, you know, chalice standard of design. It's so clean and neat, you know.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you, and it's like it's also just how they constantly reuse them as well. Like you said, you mentioned earlier about, you know, making sure you introduce and then finish off with it, and just how they never let that forget, or they focus on that, which I think is, a massive thing. I want to ask you a question, mate. What is for you then? You're talking about like a clean pace. You mentioned Nintendo as the platinum standard. For those who are listening, like, what would you recommend is the best way of pacing, of mechanic introduction in that, my friend?
Well, one of the big lessons I took is from Legend of Zelda's dungeon setup, which is basically, if you introduce a mechanic like a tool, like the boomerang or the slingshot or the hook shot, you should then give an opportunity to use that mechanic in a variety of different ways. I'm a huge fan of Game Maker's Toolkit, Mark Brown's series.
Phenomenal.
So good, right? Chef kiss. But he talks a lot about Nintendo style design, and I'm going to be aping a lot of his sentences, paraphrasing him in a bad way. But basically, I think that the key thing is, if you've got a mechanic, if you've got someone you want the player to be doing, you want to make sure that you're going to get the most out of that mechanic. You're going to be able to max out its use, right? You want to make sure that as a system designer, that you're putting in versatile mechanics that are going to allow level designs to be interesting and creative and have creative solutions for the player. So that's something I picked up a lot working on so many Lego games, is the importance of having mechanics that are versatile. A lot of Lego games make do with just like, you know, a pad that you've got a character on, you press a button and something happens. And it's very versatile, but there's no creativity to be had with it. There's no kind of possibility space. You've only got that one interaction. And a lot of mechanics in Lego are based on kind of just pushing the level along a bit. And on Nintendo, you've got mechanics that have that kind of same one-to-one relationship, but they kind of max out the ways it's going to be used by introducing new variables. The Game Maker's Toolkit video I was going to bring up is the 4-step level design one.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. That's like, that's some seminal stuff. That's really, really good. Highly recommend anyone listening who's been living under a rock for 10 years and hasn't seen that video to check it out.
I'll put a link down in the description for those who want to see it, because I agree with you, mate. It's one that needs to be looked at.
Indeed. So basically with the pacing, what I did was I made sure that whenever I introduced a new character who comes with their own mechanics, of course, because all the mechanics Lego are attached to characters, that there was a level afterwards that would use that mechanic in a bunch of ways. I didn't specifically decide which way those would be used. What I did was, because this kind of goes in a little bit to leadership style, because when I became a director, anyone becomes a director, they'll find they have to kind of take their hand off the wheel a little bit and let other people do the actual hands-on work. So I had to delegate out parts of the game, huge chunks of it. Like on Chima, I indulged in doing a bunch of the paper design myself, at least as a starting point. But towards the end of Chima and more in Ninjago, I tried to give much more of a blank page to the level designers on my team. So what I did was I would pace out the game in an Excel sheet, and I would know when a mechanic was coming in. So I would know when it was going to be like used for the first time. And I would see on that sheet whenever a mechanic hadn't came up for a long period of time. So I could kind of say this level here needs to bring this back because it's been 5 levels and no one's seen it, and it's in their repertoire. And that kind of pacing, it seems like a really obvious thing to do, but it isn't present in a lot of Lego games because again, you can control what character is in what level. So that pacing sheet was a big thing. Having a level, essentially a dungeon, where the mechanic you give to the player can be used in various ways. Trying to bring in mechanics that were a bit less binary and had a bit more of a possibility space. Stuff like the way the eagle glides, for example, and bringing in environmental mechanics to affect the way that works. I mean, just trying to use them in like creative, fun ways, basically. Like I was trying to ensure that when the mechanics came up, they were never really used in the same basic way over and over. So that was a big thing I took from Nintendo, was like to make sure that when you introduce a mechanic that you let the player use it, and you use it in a few different ways. And I always said to like new level designers and work experience students, like if you can use the mechanic in a bunch of different ways, maybe it's not a very good mechanic. Maybe you should replace that with something else or change it somehow.
Yeah, I agree, mate. Especially when you put in production scale as well, because you don't always get these unique mechanics. It's very rare that you see these throwaway, like, when you think about Timefall 2, the very famous level where you switch through time, I'm always like blown away how that one mechanic was made and used, I mean, in such a great way, but thrown away so quickly. I was like, wow, that must have been a lot of setup for a one punch,
Yeah, no, totally. And I imagine it was quite a tough sell. I mean, unless it was part of the original pitch. But
yeah.
Then again, I mean, there's a reason it's only used in one place, and that's because wherever you use it, you have to build 2 levels in the same.
Yeah, like hats off to them for it. But yeah, it's like, I agree with you, mate. It's always about quality over quantity, especially in terms of mechanics. And when you mentioned the sheet, it is amazing how it should be obvious, but in my experience, I've very rarely seen that as well, which is a shame. So yeah, I think it's not just a Lego game thing; it's a very just game-orientated issue in some ways.
Yeah, well, some people felt it was kind of prescriptive. Like whenever they were given a level, they'd be like, "You can do whatever you want, but you have to use these mechanics." Like some people don't even like that amount of limitation on them. I'll talk a bit about kind of my level design method that I picked up at UClan and I used during my time at TT, and I still kind of recommend to like very new designers or designers who struggle with the blank page and kind of creating a formula for what's going to happen, because it connects to what I mentioned about the versatile mechanics and ensuring that pacing wise they're used in a variety of different creative ways. So my method, and I'm gonna take a quick intake of breath. It's loosely called the timeline method. It was taught to me by a tutor at UClan whose name is Josh, and I don't know where he got it from, but essentially it's based on generating lists. So the steps that I do when starting a level design is I create a list of all the mechanics that I have available to me, and then I create a list of all the things the environment can offer me, because a big thing for me in level design is making sure that you're making use of the environment's unique potential. Like if you're doing a level in a desert or in a submarine or in a volcano, there's a lot of unique opportunities that you want to take advantage of. You don't want to miss out on those. So that's list number 2, the environmental mechanics. And then list number 3 is how the first list and second list might interact with each other, how the mechanics you have might work differently or affect things differently in this environment. So the third list is kind of where the mechanics meet the environment, So for example, if you're in a volcano and you got a grapple gun, maybe you're, pulling out plugs so lava flows from a hole, stuff like that. If you've got fire and you're in an ice environment, obviously you're going to think, well, I can melt some ice, can't I? So those 3 lists. And then the 4th list I do is environmental kind of shapes, interesting artistic aspects that might be added to the level. And I find that a lot of designers I work with, they start with list number 4. They're very location and environment driven and usually very artistic as well. It usually comes hand in hand with some artistic or architectural talent. I can be completely honest and self-identify that that's kind of lacking a bit in me, like the architectural and realism aspect of level design. And obviously, working in Lego games, I didn't get much chance to improve upon that. Most of it was either very kind of zany, cartoony worlds or based on existing movie sets, like the aforementioned Minas Tirith and Willertop. So I'm very much into the mechanical flow and interactions the player takes in a level. And I think that's an important structure that some people who start from the other direction, from the location direction, they struggle to add. Once they start with the location and its kind of realistic requirements, they struggle to pace the player's experience through it. Whereas I start at the other end and I have the opposite problem. So what I do is, once I have these lists, I find moments, events that I want to occur in the level, and I kind of pick them out from this glorious spider diagram. And basically I come up with the geometry, the environment space required to enable them. So if I've got like a bridge that I want to pull down with a grapple to cover a gap, then I know I need both sides of the gap. I know it has to be out of jump distance. I know the bridge has to be the same length as the gap. So it kind of creates the space for me. And I end up with these like chunks, these islands of gameplay, and then I pace them out on a timeline. And usually that stage is pretty instinctual. Like I'm able to kind of feel which parts should be before which. Sometimes it's more guided by like how the environment will look and that kind of architectural and artistic concern. And essentially what this does is it ensures that I get every idea that I want in the level for sure. And it means it's very easy to fill a blank page with the mechanics and environment. So there's always a list of things you want to have happening there. And then after that, I apply the 4-step approach. I try to find these little events that I have, can I add more variations of that event to kind of introduce that system to the player? And so that's kind of my approach. And like I said, it has some flaws. Coming from the other end, it can be hard to later on add that artistic architectural realism to it. And I have found that often my level designs, before having that kind of passed on them, they come across as very, very gamey. They have that quality.
Well, I wanted to ask you about this, mate, because it's just funny because I was chatting because you mentioned about some people focus on the architecture, you focus more primarily on the gameplay. I had Evan Hill, who's an LD at Naughty Dog, on the previous week, and he was saying how for him it's about narrative and focusing mainly on that. So it's just interesting because, again, it just shows, one, how much goes into a level, and two, like at each studio, how their philosophies and also the responsibilities of an LD can vastly, change. And I think that's fascinating. I wanted to ask you a question on that as well, mate, because from my experience, getting a list of the gameplay has been one of the hardest things to get from the gameplay teams. But I guess with you being a crossover in working with the systems, how did you find, did you guys wait before you could do your levels till you had all the rough gameplay design prior, or was it just a constant back and forth and reiterating, being like, oh, I don't actually have, for example, the fire and the ice. Well, we don't have a throwing fireball, but we have stationary fire.
Well, going back to the timelines I mentioned earlier, you can imagine it was very much like a Wallace and Gromit building the train track in front of ourselves. Normally, the game design document process would normally last about 3 weeks. If I was lucky, I would get 3 weeks to kind of plan out the game. And obviously, while things are still being built, there's room for iteration. But for the most part, at least in my teams when I was directing, the goal was to get down everything that was going to be in the game and get the level list and then start generating level design documents. And at that very early stage, there could be some kind of two-way feedback between the level design team and the system design. For the most part, I would say it was locked in. I would say that the mechanics come down to level design team and they have to use the tools that are in the box, which is why I put so much emphasis on getting the tools right and checking versatility of mechanics. I used to do this thing. I call it the rubber lips test. It's the wax lips test. The wax lips test is based on, it's a joke from The Simpsons where Homer passes a stall where a snake oil salesman, is selling wax lips, the candy. He says, the candy of a million uses. And Homer says, like what? So, for example, a comedic replacement for your own lips. And Homer says, what else? And then he walks Fake walks into a fake basement. Underneath the stall. And basically the wax lips test, which I would give to work experienced students and new designers, is the list. You take that mechanic and give me a list of like 10 things you can do with it, you know? Is it, you know, a versatile mechanic, or does it only have one use? Is it a pair of wax lips, you know? So I think it's important to arm the level designers with versatile mechanics that can be used in creative ways, because I mean, if you hamstring them that early on, you know, that's just it's gonna be unsolvable on their part. So.
Yeah, no, I think there's a healthy balance to it. We mentioned earlier about you're talking about the process because the fact of people might be scared of the blank level, the blank page aspect to it, but when you have like no mechanics of it, or like some mechanics that don't go far at all, they hinder you on so many different ways as an LD. So yeah,
going back to what you said earlier about like, you know, like the narrative inspiration and such, like it's probably no surprise that coming from Lego, I'm more obsessed with the mechanical flow and not more into like, you know, narrative and theme. Having moved from TT onto other projects that have more kind of narrative elements to them, I have found it's very difficult to take ownership of the narrative in the level unless much like systems, the narrative is also usually fluctuating during a game's development. It's unusual, at least in my experience, for the game screenplay to lock up and stay static. Usually, especially the latter parts of the game or development, whenever resources get short and parts start getting cut and all of a sudden scenes don't make any sense and you don't have the backup information that was required to make one of the scenes meaningful. And because of that, the narrative kind of becomes shifting sands and it's hard to, build anything on top of that. So that's been a struggle for me, which perhaps is why I stick closer to the systems, which, although they are also open to change, they tend to, once they're in the bank, you don't usually lose a system for the most part, like because it requires so much changes to the work that's been done already. So going back, I guess, to my life story, which I'll speed up a little bit now. So I was directing on Ninjago, and then on Chima was assistant game direction. But on Chima, I took a lot of responsibility, but I wasn't a lead, and Ninjago was my first one. Another little anecdote, which I've shared, I think, twice in the last week in various podcasts and stuff, is on Ninjago Shadow of Ronan, I accidentally named that game. Yeah, which is pretty rare. People in the industry will know it's pretty rare to name a game. So basically that game, like I said earlier, we were able to write our own story and pick our own levels for that. And I have a tendency to brand ideas when I'm making them. I find them easier to sell if you're making a system, to give it a name, like a brand that gets finished, something catchy that people can kind of, it feels more finished even though it's not in my hand yet. So I would brand things. And when I was working on the game design document during that 3-week period I mentioned earlier, I just tagged Lego Ninjago Shadow of Ronan as a working title on the first document. It was a gag for me, a lone joke just for myself. It was a reference to a game that I played when I was a kid, which was Ninja Shadow of Darkness on, I believe, the first PlayStation. And it was just a little nod to me, and I didn't think it was going to go anywhere. It didn't even occur to me, it wasn't even an attempt to get it onto the shelf, because usually there's so many like publishers and IP representatives or writers that want to leave their mark on the game that will use that as an opportunity. So I left it on the document, and then halfway through the project, I think it was, there was a poll set around as to what the name should be, and there was no better suggestions, and it just stuck, and I went all the way through to the end. So I named the game.
Yeah, I didn't even know people had the power to do that. This is the first time. Well done, man.
Almost every time you get a game, it's really got a name.
Yes.
Almost always, because it was part of the green light, pitch. Mm-hmm. But I guess subtitles are more fair game.
Yeah. No, man, that's awesome. We will start to wrap it up, mate, because it's always been an hour, but I'd love to get you on another week coming up, if that's okay, mate, because I know we've only scratched the surface.
I didn't even get it at TT. I'm still at TT.
Yeah. Well, that's it. I want to come back, especially I'd love to hear your thoughts on the difference between multiplayer and single player levels. Like, that's something I really want to hear about, which I'm excited for. So if you don't mind, mate, I'd love to have you back for a second one, if that's okay.
No, yeah, sure. Yeah. To be continued. Certainly.
Awesome. All right. Well, I'll say I'll wrap up here then. But again, I don't mean to cut you off. It's just normally an hour is the bar a couple, but I try to keep it mostly an hour at most, for it.
Oh, no, don't worry. I'm parched.
You know,
It's fine.
all right, mate. All right. So, well, this has been such a educational episode, and there will be a part 2 to this episode because, as Steve mentioned, we've still got a lot to learn about his career as well as the different projects that you've worked on, mate. So I just want to say thank you very much for this episode, and I can't wait for the sequel episode as well.
Yeah, no problem. I hope it wasn't too kind of stream of consciousness. Like I bounced around quite a lot there, but as you know, like topics overlap each other, right? So it's hard to go linearly.
No, I mean, man, for me, even just just chatting to you, it's been fascinating just to hear. So I'm sure plenty others will have gained a lot from this episode, mate. And just thank you again for coming on.
Cheers, man. Been a blast. Thank you.
So if people want to reach you, mate, how's the best way to do so?
I've never done this before. Wow. Okay. So if you want to like and subscribe to me, I've only got a Twitter, really. So it's @_Steve Thornton, which is my name.
Awesome. I will stick a link to that in the description down below as well.
Yeah. I don't really have a website or a channel or anything. So that's it.
A man of mystery. I get it.
Yeah. @_Steve Thornton.
Awesome. So again, thank you very much for coming on the show, mate. And thank you all for listening to it. And we'll catch you all next time.